the sound that shouldn't have existed. The wind howled across the plateau like a thing alive, shrill, angry, relentless. It tore at the old shutters of Elias Carver's cabin, rattling them like bones in a box. Rain came down in sheets, each drop sharp and cold, drumming the tin roof with a fury that made the rafters groan. Out here at the edge of nowhere, no one came knocking. Not in weather like this. Not in any weather. Not in 8 long years. So when the knock came hard, unsteady, desperate, it didn't just startle Elias. It rooted him to the floor. He was in the middle of sewing a torn saddle strap by firelight, hands weathered and slow. The sound at the door wasn't polite. It wasn't the knock of a traveler seeking warmth. It was more like someone pounding on the wood with the last strength they had. Then voices muffled, foreign, laced with urgency. One rose above the others, broken but clear. "Sir, please. If you send us away, you will die too." Elias didn't move. Not right away. His Winchester hung above the mantel untouched. His dog hadn't barked. He'd been buried 5 winters ago. The only other soul nearby was Thistle, his old mare, in the stable. So whatever stood at his door shouldn't exist. Lightning split the sky, and in its flash he saw their shadows, figures hunched against the cold, drenched shaking. Women, 10 of them. One held a bundle that stirred weakly in her arms. Another pressed her hand against the side of the door frame, fingers slick with something darker than rain. Elias's fingers brushed the door latch. 8 years of silence stood between him and that door. And beyond it, a voice had come, one not asking for shelter, but warning of something far worse already on its way. Would he open it, or would he die wondering what it meant to care one last time? The man behind the door was once called Elias Carver, a name that had once meant something in the dusty rail towns of Arizona territory. Before the silence, before the mountains swallowed him, he used to be a builder, a mind sharp with numbers, hands steady with wood and steel. Elias had overseen bridges and rail beds, sketching blueprints by lantern light, and watching trains thunder across structures born from his ink. But that was a long time ago, back when he wore a wedding ring and believed in letters getting delivered. Back when June still braided her hair at the window, and Thomas, their boy, had chased lizards barefoot in the orchard behind the house. That orchard was ash now, and the house beside it was long gone, burned in the crossfire of a military raid gone wrong. Officially, it had been an error. Unofficially, it had been a warning. All Elias had left was a shack perched on the edge of redstone cliffs, a lame horse named Thistle, and a letter he'd never mailed, a folded piece of paper tucked inside the spine of a Bible he never opened. June had written it the week before she died. It ended mid-sentence. "If anything happens, forgive them, even if they never." She never finished the thought. Elias never finished the man he had been. After the fire, he'd taken Thomas, just 12 then, and disappeared westward. But grief makes a poor traveling companion. By the time they crossed into New Mexico, the boy had grown silent, withdrawn. One night, Elias woke to find the bedroll empty. Just a note carved in charcoal on the barn door. "Don't follow. I need to find my own peace." That was 8 years ago. Since then, Elias had spoken only to his mare and the wind. His hands built fences no one touched. His fireplace burned wood no one gathered. His heart beat out of habit, not hope. The world had tried to offer him healing churchmen, passing through widows with soft hands and baskets of bread, but he'd turned them all away, with a stare as cold as rifle steel, because healing meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. He wasn't cruel, just finished. Until tonight. Until 10 women stood outside his door in the storm. Until one voice reached into the hollowed-out place behind his ribs and said something no one had dared say in a decade. "You still matter." The door creaked open slowly, like an old man waking from a dream he never meant to leave. Rain blew sideways into the entryway, wetting the wooden floor Elias had swept that morning out of sheer habit. The women filed in without a word, shadows moving like bruises against the walls. They didn't look up at him. They didn't thank him. They simply passed, dripping silence and blood. The last one to enter paused just inside the threshold. She turned and met his eyes, not with gratitude, but with the heavy look of someone who'd run out of time and refused to beg for more. Her cheekbone was split, blood dried into a line along her jaw. She held no child, no weapon, only an odd sense of command. Odd. "My name is Naomi," she said, voice measured low. "You may regret what you just did." Elias shut the door behind her. The wind protested, slamming one last gust through the cracks before falling away. He placed the iron bar back across the frame. The sound of it locking into place echoed through the cabin like a rifle cocking. "I've regretted worse," he replied. He moved around them slowly, offering towels from a drawer, pointing toward the fire. They moved with restraint, not weakness. One tended to a younger girl with a split lip. Another cradled a baby swaddled in a wool cloak, barely breathing, but alive. Naomi stood by the hearth, watching Elias. Her posture said she was waiting, not resting. Waiting for him to ask, or accuse, or throw them back into the storm. Instead, he poured a kettle of water and handed it to her. "What are you running from?" Naomi looked into the flames before she answered. "Men with law on their coats and no law in their hearts. Soldiers. Led by a man named Danton." The name thudded in Elias's gut like a second knock on the door. He'd heard it before, back when he still listened. Naomi continued. "They raided our village 3 days ago. Claimed we were hiding a fugitive. What they wanted was our daughters." A sharp inhale broke the room's stillness from the girl with the baby. She looked maybe 16, maybe less. "We didn't run because we're cowards," Naomi said. "We ran because we were outnumbered, and what's left of us matters more alive than buried." Elias nodded slowly. But a knot was building behind his sternum, because harboring them didn't make him a man of compassion. It made him a traitor, in the eyes of the law. And the law in these parts wasn't slow to judge nor kind when it passed sentence. "They'll come here," he said. "If they're close, they'll track you to my door." Naomi didn't blink. "Then you'll have to decide what kind of man you still are." That was the cut. It wasn't the fear of soldiers or the fire they'd bring. It was that question, because Elias had built this place to forget who he'd once been, not to remember it. He walked to a shelf above the fireplace and pulled down an old wooden box. Inside was a pair of spectacles, a rusted compass, and a folded piece of paper. He didn't need to open it. He knew the words by heart. It was June's unfinished letter. He read the final line aloud. Not for Naomi, not for the others, but to hear it out loud in a house that had known too much silence. "Forgive them, even if they never ask." Naomi watched him closely. "I didn't forgive them," he said quietly. "But I did forget how to be anything else." Outside, the wind had softened. But it wasn't peace. It was the breath before a scream. Naomi placed a small hunting knife on the table beside him. "They're less than an hour behind," she said. "Maybe less." Elias looked down at the blade, then up at the door. "Then I guess this house remembers how to fight." Elias hadn't lit the second lantern in 8 years. But now, as the wind eased outside and the shadows thickened inside, he struck a match and let the soft orange light fill the corners of the cabin. Truth, he figured, deserved full illumination. Naomi stood near the mantel, arms folded tight across her chest, not from the cold, but from memory. The other women sat or crouched in corners, tending wounds, drying soaked fabric, rocking the baby that barely made a sound. It was as if they all knew the storm outside wasn't the real danger. It never was. "You said his name was Danton Elias," said voice low. Naomi nodded once. "Captain Eli Danton, Fort Lancaster. His badge is brass, but his hands are soaked in blood." Elias's jaw tensed. That name hadn't come up since the spring Thomas had disappeared. Back when rumors swirled about a cleanup campaign led by a man who acted without orders and covered his cruelty under the word expansion. Naomi stepped closer. Her voice never rose, but each word fell like a stone in water. He doesn't come to conquer. He comes to erase. Villages that don't bend fast enough vanish. Reports get rewritten. Victims become rebels. No graves are marked. No justice follows. She pulled something from the folds of her belt, a badge. Bent, blackened, smeared with something too dark to be dirt. She tossed it onto the table. That belonged to Lieutenant Mays. He was supposed to protect us. Instead, he laughed while they took my sister. Elias stared at the badge but didn't touch it. Naomi's eyes glistened, but her face was steel. She was 12, she said. The room went still. Even the baby stopped fussing. I buried her myself. Naomi continued beneath a cottonwood tree just before we ran. The soil hadn't gone cold yet when Danton's men circled back. They didn't even notice the fresh mound. Elias turned away, pretending to stoke the fire, but really just needing space to breathe. It was happening again, the same script written in different blood. June and Thomas hadn't died from an accident. Not truly. The men who ordered the sweep never faced consequence. The official report read, civilian casualties during crossfire. Ranch perimeter breached by bandits. Fort responded in standard protocol. But Elias remembered the symbol burned into the siding of his old house, a crude phoenix drawn by a soldier's knife into the wood as a warning. It wasn't regulation. It was a message. We were next, Naomi said, softer now. Not because we fought, but because we stayed. She looked directly at him, and that terrifies men like Danton more than any weapon women who won't run when they're told to disappear. One of the younger women by the fire lifted her voice gently. We didn't just survive. We remembered names. We remembered faces. That's why they're coming. Elias nodded slowly. He crossed the room and opened a cabinet he hadn't touched in years. Behind a layer of old cloth lay a hand-carved wooden box. Inside a compass, 2 bullet molds, and a folded piece of parchment, the original map of the surrounding hills and passes. Routes he'd helped lay track through. Trails no longer used, forgotten by most. He placed the map on the table. You didn't come to hide, he said. Naomi stepped forward, her gaze steady. We came to make sure someone survived to tell the truth. We just didn't expect the truth to be waiting for us in this house. Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at the young girl cradling the baby. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. She was listening, learning. So was the child in some strange way. He felt it. The kind of memory that lives in bone and blood. He returned to the mantel and lifted June's letter once more. Forgive them, even if they never ask. Not today, he thought, but maybe. Protect those who will never forget. He yanked. The first shot didn't come with a warning. It came with a scream from the woods. A woman's voice, brief, sharp, cut through the cabin, just as Elias was lighting a lantern in the crawl space beneath the kitchen. He froze, flame flickering. Then came the second sound, hooves. Fast, heavy, closing in. Naomi was already moving. She signaled to the women without words, and they scattered. Some ducked behind stacked crates. Others slipped behind curtains or into the hallway. They weren't scared. They were practiced. Elias had thought they came for shelter. He realized now they came to finish something. They're testing the perimeter, Naomi whispered, counting windows, planning the breach. Elias grabbed the Winchester from the wall, checked the chamber. How long do we have? Naomi gave a tight shake of her head. Minutes. He moved to the back window and saw 3 riders forming a loose line beyond the pasture fence. Their silhouettes flared and faded under lightning. One of them dismounted and moved toward the barn. They'll surround us, Elias said. push us inward, then set fire to the house. Naomi stared out the window. Her voice dropped low. That's how they burned my village. Elias swallowed hard. His palms felt dry. But his body, once sluggish from years of disuse, moved like it remembered. They couldn't win in a siege. So they'd have to make the first move. He looked at Naomi. If we can break the line at the rear tree line, we can draw them off. There's a dry gully they won't expect. Naomi nodded, already tying her braid. Who goes? I do, Elias said. You lead the women through the crawlspace exit up toward the bluff. I'll draw fire from the east side. Buy you 10 minutes. Naomi's hand touched his arm, not to stop him, but to ground him. Don't die angry, she said. It's a useless kind of death. He almost smiled. Almost. The night exploded. Rifles cracked through the rain as Elias ran low across the ridge beside the fence line. His boots tore through wet grass, his breath coming sharp in his ears. He fired twice into the air, luring the men forward. It worked. Shouts rang out. Horses turned. He sprinted toward the gully, slid, rolled, but then a cry behind him. Not Naomi, a younger voice. Kaya! Elias spun mid-mud, heart seizing. The girl, the one with the baby, hadn't followed the others. She doubled back. One of the soldiers had grabbed her. He saw the blade glint against her side. Before he could shout, another figure slammed into the man from the dark, a blur of fabric limbs and fury. It was Aisha, the quiet one who'd barely spoken since arriving. She drove her body into the soldier, knocking him sideways. The gun went off. Once. Echoed sharp. Then silence. Elias reached them seconds later. The soldier was dead. So was Isha. Kaya sobbed, clutching her baby knees in the mud. Elias dropped beside her hands, trembling, pressing into Aisha's chest, but there was no blood pumping. The bullet had found the heart. She didn't even say anything, Kaya whispered. She just jumped. Naomi arrived moments later, face slick with rain and grief. She didn't cry. She knelt, took Isha's hand and kissed her knuckles. She was the last of her family, Naomi said quietly. She said once, she'd rather die making a difference than live remembering silence. They buried her beneath a cedar tree behind the barn. No words, just earth and breath. Afterward, Elias stood alone near the fence, watching torchlight gather in the distance. The enemy wasn't retreating, just regrouping. But something had shifted. They were no longer prey, not entirely. Because when one soul lays down their life for another, it no longer feels like running. It feels like resistance. The cabin was quiet again, not with peace, but with waiting. Naomi sat by the hearth, sharpening the blade that had once belonged to her sister. The others readied what little they had, cloth torn into bandages, nails bent into makeshift caltrops windows, reinforced with overturned furniture. Outside torchlights swam in the valley like fireflies, summoned by war. Elias stood near the back exit, hands blackened with mud and oil. He'd wired the detonator beneath the dam 2 hours ago. Just one spark and the whole ridge would crumble, sending a wall of water crashing down the valley. The plan was clear. Flood them, drown them, end it. If we do this, Naomi said softly, no one comes looking. No one tells the truth. Elias didn't answer. His hand rested on a small wooden box on the shelf. Inside 2 sticks of dynamite, 1 fuse, the weight of everything he'd never used. Truth doesn't survive a flood, he finally said, only silence. Naomi looked at him. And children. Elias froze. Children don't survive it either, she said. She opened her hand and revealed a toy, small, carved from pine. A horse, crudely made, tail broken. One of Danton's men brought his daughter, she whispered. She's no older than 4. We saw her near the rear wagon. She's been coughing since sunset. Elias stared at the floorboards, as if the answer might rise up through the grain. They used to call that a shield, he muttered. In the war, soldiers brought children into enemy camps, made sure someone else would bleed before they did. Naomi stepped closer. But what kind of man lets a child die to feel clean again? It wasn't anger in her voice. It was mercy. And that mercy undid him more than any accusation ever could. They changed the plan. The flood was scrapped. The dynamite buried again. Not to hide, but to honor the dead with something better than vengeance. Instead, they set the ground with traps. Bare teeth beneath leaves, fishing wire stretched across the trail, broken glass along the fence line. But the true trap was patience. Elias knew this land. Knew the way the ravine curved behind the ridge, the narrow choke point where horses couldn't pass more than two at a time. He used to ride it blindfolded back when Thomas was still small and laughed at every turn. They'll split their force, he said. Front assault, side sweep. We let the front enter first, loud and confident. The rest, we take from behind. Naomi nodded. We have one shot, no second chances. That's all I ever get, Elias said. Oh. The night broke open again at 2:14 a.m. 3 gunshots, then silence. Then 12 torches charging the cabin. The women stood their ground. They didn't scream. They didn't fire first. They let the soldiers feel brave, let them come close. Too close. And then, the tripwire caught the first rider, sent him tumbling into the mud. A blade flashed beneath the porch. Another rider fell clutching his leg. From the rooftop, Elias fired once clean through the shoulder of the man, kicking in the door. The cabin held, until it didn't. They breached the side wall, splinters exploding inward. Naomi met them blade to blade, teeth clenched, moving like fire-made flesh. Elias burst from the rear trench and flanked the remaining guards. His boots were soaked arms, shaking, but his aim was true. The baby was gone, already smuggled out hours earlier with a girl called Kaya, and a mule so old it barely walked straight. They were safe. They had to be. By sunrise it was over. Smoke rose from the pasture. 6 soldiers lay dead. 2 wounded. Danton was gone. Fled killed. No one knew. His coat was found by the creek, bloodied and abandoned. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was that no flood came, that a child had lived, that no grave needed to hold someone too small to choose sides. By noon, the sky turned a soft blue-gray, as if even the heavens had grown weary of storm and blood. Naomi stood beneath the cedar tree where they'd laid Aisha to rest. No marker, just a woven band of blue and red thread tied around the trunk, a quiet color for a quiet girl who'd never asked for anything but gave everything. Elias watched from the porch. His rifle was gone, buried in the same ground as his silence. He'd spent the morning mending the door, though he knew he wouldn't be staying long. The land had changed. The house had changed. And so had he. Inside, the women packed their things. Kaya whispered songs to the baby girl in her arms, swaying gently in the corner near the stove. Naomi helped marry the cook's daughter who'd come with the soldiers, but chose not to stay with them, fold what little clothing they'd gathered. They weren't fleeing anymore. They were leaving. That was different. Naomi approached Elias as he sat on the steps. Her face was tired, but her eyes held something rare, peace, maybe. Or the beginning of it. You could come with us, she said. He shook his head. I need to walk this land one more time, he said. To say goodbye to who I was and make peace with who I've got left. She didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. On it, stitched in simple, uneven thread, was a name, Thomas. Naomi placed it in his hands. You said your son walked into the wild, she said. Maybe this helps him find his way back. He swallowed hard. No answer came, and only the tightness in his throat that said more than words ever could. As they rode out one by one in silence, Elias stood beside the doorway. Then he turned and did something he hadn't done in 8 years. He placed a second chair beside the fire, just in case someone came in from the rain. If this story reached you even just a little, stay with us. There's always a chair by the fire and always another story to tell. Subscribe to the channel and we'll keep the flame lit.